Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Sunday Night Breakdown. Daniel Ratledge and Dave Forrester with you, looking back over a big weekend of British Basketball League action. But before we get to the weekend, let's start with the midweek. I think this will be a quick one. Wednesday night, Glasgow Rocks 89, London Lions 108. I mean, Lions were already 24 points ahead in that. That was a trophy semi-final second leg. The only chance that the Rocks have really is to get off to a good start, and Lions finished the first quarter 12-2. They were up 12, and that was basically game over. If the tie was even on before the
you say it was the only chance, but in reality they had no chance. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. They had no chance, and they didn't do much different. They played better offense in this game, the Rocks, but the reality was they played similar levels of defense. They didn't challenge the Lions. 3-point shooters. The Lions shot 17 out of 35. They allowed themselves to get some false confidence for the upcoming games, which probably didn't do them any good in the long run. They scored 108 points, and the game was played. Basically, they flew through it.
They did. They flew to it as well. That was the probably the biggest talking point, is that a team has flown to a game on a private jet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So welcome to
You wonder how the cost of the flight would cost to the Rocks budget for the season, but there you go.
Yeah, well, maybe lockdown, nobody's flying anywhere. Maybe Vince got a deal.
Cheap, yeah. So the one notable, Kevin Ware, six of six from 3-point range in about 5 minutes at the end of the third quarter into the fourth, and notable because of what happens next. And Robinson only played 9 minutes, so I'm not sure.
False dawns, fool's gold, whatever. You got to make the shots, but there's no intensity to a game like that when you're up by 35 with 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So let's move on to Friday. Close one in Sheffield. Sharks 74, Worcester Wolves 75. No Hemsley for the Sharks. McSwiggan was back in the lineup for the Wolves. And the Wolves' first 8 points of the second quarter to lead 15-24. And then it got worse for the Sharks. They didn't score for about 4 minutes and got 12 points behind.
Yeah, they were out of sync, Sheffield. I was expecting them to come off a loss or two, and I was expecting them to come out a little bit differently. But Helmsley, major piece for them, changes the way that they play. He's, averaging 18 points a game on not that many shots, and more importantly, he gets his points when the others aren't quite going. So he suddenly makes a shot that you think, oh, it's almost like it's time for him. So missing him causes some difficulties within their rotation. They've been playing the three guards basically, and Kipper Nichols at the four. So yeah, it was a surprise that they struggled early, but maybe not so much without Helmsley. That said, as we got into the basketball game, it was one of those kind of toing and throwing games. And from my memory, I'm going from my memory. I watched virtually all of this game, but it seems like it was about 3 weeks ago.
There's a lot happened since. Well, Rotino and Lewis made some shots in the third quarter. Sharks had a 14-2 run to tie the game at 48 apiece.
You've clicked my mind there, because what happened in the third quarter was that Baunek didn't start. He had 3 fouls, so I think he had 3 fouls. So Matt Newby didn't start him, and the run that Sheffield went on was primarily because they stopped Worcester scoring. But Worcester had at that point Elan and McSwiggan on the court, and McSwiggan was first game back for a while.
Yeah.
So Worcester basically lost their rhythm. They didn't have their penetrating guards. They didn't have the degree of threat that they'd had. Sheffield's suffocating kind of swarming defense caught up with them because they didn't have the guards to space them out. And it was only, I think, probably 3-4 minutes of the third quarter to go in the third quarter that Baunek came back on, and they kind of regained their equilibrium at that point.
Yeah, and then down the stretch, Kimball makes a couple of threes. Baunek hits one as well, and they were just keeping it around 4 points. And then a big play from Cook inside with the and one dunk, but he misses the free throw, and it's a 2-point game with just under a minute to go.
Yeah, and I don't remember what Worcester ran, but I do remember there was some momentum coming back down in the game, and then Rotino makes a 3 from about 28 feet.
Yeah. There's
Off
no
the
chance he called bank on that
off the
either.
glass.
That was, yeah.
And at that point, you're thinking, oh, right, okay, because as a coach on the road, you think, yeah, that has to be the one that goes in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they gave Worcester some time on the clock.
6.5 seconds left.
And Lamar Kimball is demonstrating that he is somebody who is not afraid of the big shot. Specifically, they ran the same set that they ran when he scored the winner against Leicester.
Yeah.
Basketball, because they'd advanced the ball, so the one you had half the court to throw it into. But this time, instead of cutting to the baseline, he cut to the top. And the defender, I think it might have been Nichols, maybe Lillard, kind of let him get to the middle. Now, he's right-handed, so your scouting report is probably to keep him on his left, but he does shoot the step back well, and he shoots a jump shot well. And I think I would have probably preferred that they did what they did against Manchester. If you remember going back a week against Manchester, the defender in that case kept the guy on the baseline side and made him drive straight into the middle, straight towards the basket, and the help was there.
Yeah.
Now, by letting Kimball get to the middle on this occasion instead of keeping him on the wing, that gives him options, and he has the option to step back. He has the option to continue to attack the rim. He has the option to throw the ball to the far corner for a jump shot. I don't think he was ever going to pass it, so he pulled up and he made the 18-footer. Yeah.
Still a couple of seconds left. 2.2 on the clock after he made that shot, and Sheffield lobbed it into Cook. I know on commentary, Shafty felt he probably should have scored that. Cook's reaction felt he should have scored that. I thought it looked a bit more difficult to me. I don't know what you thought.
From 2 seconds to go, if you're getting that look, you're not overly disappointed.
No,
true. You've got to think, I've drawn up a reasonable play there. I actually freeze framed it, and there's a moment when he slips that he was open for a split second for a lead pass.
Yeah.
And maybe the defender on the ball taking the view away.
Yeah.
And that could have been literally an uncontested layup on the buzzer.
Yeah.
So he had to throw the lob instead. That's why you have pressure on the ball to try and take the easy lanes away. And he threw the lob. He got to the far side. Worcester did I think it was Parks, did a smart job in not fouling. Because the last thing you want to do is to foul on inbounds with 2 seconds to go. You got to make the guy make a play. He could have made it, but you're in a position where you've got to make a shot with 2 seconds to go to win the game. You can't. Yeah. Some you're going to make, some you're going to miss. And it's probably tough as well asking a guy who's 6'10", and that isn't his game. He isn't really a lob catcher.
No.
Suddenly he's the guy who has to catch the lob and finish without coming down. It's not the way that he plays. It's not what he plays in the half court. He's not a dunker. He's not a rolling dunker. He's more of a post-up guy, a couple of dribbles, drop step, and a shot, and a hook shot. So yeah, he did his best. He tried to make a play, didn't make a play. Move on to the next game.
Okay, we will. London Lions 105, Manchester Giants 81, and I've obviously I've obviously watched this back the next day, and I'm sitting there watching it, going, what are they doing, Manchester here? I mean, they sort of kept with them. It was just an up and down scoring race. And they kept with them for maybe 10 or 13 minutes, but they gave up 50 points inside 15 minutes. That's just a surefire way to lose in the copper box.
Yeah, exactly. And London are comfortable in that environment, and their shooters are comfortable. And again, Manchester didn't do much to take away their shooters. In fact, do anything to take away their shooters. And to be fair, Manchester made some plays at the other end. They're not a bad for all we're getting on stuck into them. They're not a bad basketball team. They have some talented players. They're just in a spiral at the moment. They've gone through the slip and they've gone through the skate and they're into a spiral. And they haven't got a coach at the moment. We've got a new coach coming in. So they've got an interim coach. And interim coaches are impossible situations because the players know you're an interim. So the players are thinking about next week, is the coach going to like me? Is he not? The game at London, they're not expected to win. So no one is going to, put themselves out there in those circumstances to do kind of all the extra little things that you have to do to be competitive against the London team. So, I think they broke it open at the beginning of the second half in particular. and that was when I stopped watching. So,
yeah. I mean, again, the notable, we touched on it in the other game. Ware made his first 4 3-pointers in this game, so he'd hit 10 in a row across the two games, and he ended up 5 of 6, so 11 of 12 across 2 games, which is, I mean, you got to make those shots even if you're open. You still got to make those shots, and Dirk made a few as well, and he's been struggling a little bit of late, but I mean, this game just kept going away from
and
Manchester.
as I say, they're dangerous games for everybody. They're dangerous games for the team that's losing, because your team can crack open and crack apart, and you can. It's not a question of what happens in the game. It's a question of what happens in the locker room afterwards. It's a question of how you get onto the next game. The question of, are you able to keep everybody together and keep everybody pointing in the same direction, because you end up at a point with the time with fingers being pointed. So it's dangerous for that. And to be honest, it's actually probably more dangerous if fingers aren't being pointed, because then you know what's going on. But also it's dangerous for the winning team, because it's easy. And I say it's easy insofar as they're all in rhythm, and there's this misnomer of momentum from game to game. There is not momentum from game to game. There's rhythm and there's comfort, but that's all dependent upon what you're up against and what you're going to bring 2 days' time in a different environment, in a different place. So, momentum stops when you walk in the next gym and you're 0-0 on the scoreboard. And those games where you make a ton of shots and you win by 40 are really dangerous games to keep everybody grounded.
Yeah. One stat as we move off this: 46 points off the bench for Manchester in an 81-point game.
No, yeah. Well, to be fair, the other thing, credit Jeremiah looks like a real player.
Yeah, he is.
In relation to, I mean, obviously, that's not meaning to minimise what he's accomplished elsewhere, and in relation to playing in the World Cup and all of that. But we've seen a number of 7-foot guys play in the have all sorts of good careers and come over to the BBL and to be frank, not be able to hack it.
Yeah.
The game, and because of everything that's going on, and he actually is fitted in extremely well. He looks like he's playing in the league for a long time. Playing in the league for a long time. So we should give him a bit of credit. Be interesting to see what happens with the new coach, and whether or not he can salvage anything.
Yeah, that's the challenge now, because they've got some work to do to put any pressure on the playoff places. Let's move on to the trophy semi-final first leg down in Plymouth. No Hamilton, so they started Neighbour and Ocharobia together. The Raiders. Neighbour hits 3 early threes. Surrey also hit a couple of threes early on to take the lead. It was a fairly tight first half, though. Yeah,
it was kind of matchup situation, wasn't it? Because you could tell that Lacey James probably hadn't played against anybody like this before, and it was an interesting matchup. Whenever we played against Will Neighbour, you were always minded to put a smaller guy on him. And he would beat you in the post occasionally, but you would try and deny him the ball in the post and push him off the block and maybe front him. But what you didn't want to ever do was to be 4 or 5 feet off him at the 3-point line. I think one of them, I think he ran a screen and roll, took one dribble to his left, and there was nobody there. He actually, and he just pulled up and drained the 3. So that matchup was interesting. The game was up and down. It was it was a first leggy game.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the teams are feeling themselves out, but you never got the impression that either team overextended itself defensively, because they know they're going to be turning around and playing 48 hours later for the marbles, as it were. And in particular, Plymouth have played a lot better defensively than they did in that game. Surrey were up for the game. Surrey still had that issue of all the players, and Creon rather shortened his rotation in this game. He limited Rickman to 5 minutes. Limited Caelan to only 2 minutes. Hildreth, I think, only 12 minutes, because he struggled a little bit with the length of the Raiders on his drives. But they did well enough to hold in the game, and Hicks and McGill basically went at each other.
So there was Hicks hits a couple of threes and puts them up, and then Plymouth came back with a 17-3 run, as you say. McGill started off, Morsell and eBay, and suddenly they're up 11 with 13 to play, and that's a key moment in the game, because what you've got to do is not allow that to mentally affect you. You just got to sort of chip away at it. And the way Surrey came back, they actually, Ryan Richards was super pumped up. He sort of dragged them back into the game. They go on a 10-1 run, but he was too pumped up. The one was a technical foul on him, and then he sits down. But they, in that 10-1 run, they'd cut it back to a 2-point game. And at that point, I think there was about 7 minutes to go. They've got to see that through and make sure it just stays at that sort of level.
Yeah, I mean, in the first leg, any home first leg, you're looking to see if you can disintegrate a team. You know, you get to the point whereby you've got your foot on the throat and hope that they kind of almost forget in that fourth quarter that it becomes a two-legged game.
Yeah.
And that they start chasing it. And sorry, to be fair to them, resisted that. You know, they stayed with it, and they gave themselves a real shot at the end, but they unfortunately, you know, couldn't make the plays at the end that they needed to make.
Yeah, so Raiders got 7 up. Hicks hit a couple of threes, and then with, I think it was 1:40 to go, Walsh drives in, layup, 90 to 91, and you're thinking, right, let's just go score for score, because 1 point, 2 point, no big deal. What you don't want to do is draw some blanks, and of course Morcell comes down, hits the 3, and they're 2 decent drives, Teo and then Walsh, but neither of them go in.
Yeah, I mean, Mike made a big play. It was a step back 3. You know, it's kind of a, you know, that's the type of moment whereby there's a 10-point swing on the cards either way. A minute and a half to go in that game. It can be 5 either way, basically. Made a big play. Teo drove in on eBay. Tough.
Yeah.
You know, tough. And Walsh as well. He, I think, drove to his left, which was tough as well. And they probably weren't as patient as I would have liked in that situation. I think I would have liked the ball in Hicks' hands to try and get something a little bit better than that. Maybe at that point they did maybe just chase it just a little bit. But Surrey are a relatively individualistic team in any event, so it's not like they went, you know, too far out of what they normally do.
No. And
at the other end, from memory, then Morcell made his play. eBay got an offensive rebound.
Yeah.
And put back right. I finished off with his right hand, and there's a subsequent foul shot, I think, as well, wasn't there?
Yeah,
so,
there was. Yeah, one free throw.
Smartest foul. So 7 points, and suddenly Plymouth are going away happy. Albeit Surrey are relatively satisfied in that, you know, they've put up a good show of themselves, and they can come back home on Sunday and do the best they can.
McGill 31 points, 12 of 19 shooting. Morcell 20 points, 8 of 11 shooting. So you've got 51 points there off 30 shots. That's good efficiency.
Yeah, and that's perimeter scoring. And when I say perimeter scoring, it doesn't mean they didn't score at the rim, but that's stuff which is originating from the perimeter, either jump shots or drives to the rim. You know, and that's too much.
Hicks, by the way, 6 of 8 threes for his 20,
yeah, well, I mean, Surrey made some shots in this game, and Plymouth probably were a little bit, as I say, that they weren't as defensively locked in as I've seen them at times.
So let's move on to Bristol Flyers 75, Cheshire Phoenix 81. Nick scored the first 8 points. Teddy Okirafor, as he's cleared it all up for us, with 8 points in a 10-0 run. And then Knicks were just about ahead for most of the rest of the half, but not by much. And actually, this game sort of bounced around until the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it was Bristol. Edozie played this game, and Delpech came off the bench. I think Edozie was like a -11, and Delpech was a +15. So, you know, they were 26 points better off on Delpech in the shed. Paramount basically shared minutes. And Edozie didn't play today, so I'm assuming that he may have been injured. So that has an impact on them. Also, Thomas Edwards still isn't playing, and he was a useful glue guy for them. He got baskets at the rim when they needed baskets at the rim. And obviously Mockford is a shooter who's not playing, and that's, you know, Mockford does what Mockford does. So they're a little bit undermanned, but against that, Cheshire are also undermanned. They got the assistant coach playing and knocking down shots as well.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't remember you ever doing that.
I once offered to go into a practice And Drew Lasker just looked at me. Nah, Dave, you stay over there. I think we had 9. I was probably early 40s at that point, but I think the guys were slightly concerned. And I did once run a pick and roll drill and threw a lob for Victor Moses to dunk it in practice. That was probably the highlight of my career. One-handed, one hand, Crandell like,
Yeah.
Anyway,
We need video proof.
There is. I don't want to get me onto video because there might be a half-court 3-point shot lurking somewhere on the internet. Anyway, so they're shorter bodies as well. Mulliam's gone home, so that's a loss to them. Farrell Gordon's not playing either, but they've benefited from the simplicity of not having to change lots of players. Everybody's getting the chance to play. And they pulled away because their guards are playing extraordinarily good. Jimbo really struggled in this game at one point, but their guards and Kyle Carey playing athletic minutes at the 3. We've forgotten Lufadeshu, and just because he's not been there for a couple of months, but he's on that roster as well. They're locked in and comfortable with each other, and that means a lot in March in the BBL. Bristol. There isn't really an end of the game to get to because I think it went out to about 15 points in the
so NBA scores 4 points, and then there's a couple of threes from Kyle Carey and Jalen Hayes, and the 12-0 run. They get up 14 with 4.5 minutes to go, and they're still up 12 with 2 minutes to play. And then Ross took a 3 where there's no rebounders, which he misses. Delpesh goes 1 of 2, but Lockett gets the offensive rebound, and then they score a 3 off that. He scores that. And then Carey was just a little too quick. He wanted a big statement dunk to sort of finish it. Right. They come back down the other end and score, and then turnover, and Baker gets a run back. So they did get it down to 4 with 1:11 to go. But then Ross took control of the game. He ran the clock, and then he drives and he scores, and
I think that was it. I got the impression that there was some mental tiredness on the Cheshire side at that point, and there's always a risk that when you are up and you're comfortable up, that you do switch off. It's the coach's nightmare. The coach is on the sideline because the coach hasn't switched off.
No,
ever. And that you're always looking at your players to say, is he still on it? Is he saving a bit of energy? Is he still focused on the game? But they've got something going at the minute, and those guards, Ross and McCall, it took them a while to kind of figure it out. With each other, but have they figured it out now? They figured it out, and we know they have scoring goals. And part of it, to be blunt, part of it is that they don't have those wing guys to worry about. They don't have to worry about finding the ball to Mulliam. Don't have to worry about throwing the ball to Farrah Gordon as a facilitator anyway, so he helps them. Don't have to worry. It's not Dizzy Liverpool isn't using 8 possessions a game, 10 possessions a game. It's more possessions for the guards to use. Means they get into more rhythm and more comfortable with each other. And no player ever will say that they're tired by shooting the ball. You don't get tired by shooting the ball. No. You get tired because the defense, you've got to play at the other end because you're playing 35 minutes instead of 30, but you're not getting tired shooting the ball. So, they're confident at the moment. And that's really good. Yeah. Baker started this game. I think he was 2 of 14 in this game. Yeah. They can't win if he's 2 of 14. Not without Thomas Edwards as well. And Mockford. That's just something that Bristol can't get over. And obviously they're coming off yet another 2-week COVID break.
Yeah. Doesn't help. The interesting stats for me on this game was the shooting stats. Ross, 25 points, 10 of 14. You take that any day of the week. McCall, 19 points off 5 shots, 5 of 5 from the floor, 6 of 6 from the free throw line. Perfect shooting night. And you compare that to Lockett, who top scored for Bristol with 20 points off 17 shots.
Yeah, that is hideously efficient. This is beyond efficient, And these guys, Teddy Okafor is a good defender. Eric Lockett has got long arms, For these guys to shoot that type of percentage on the road, with the amount of games that they've played, as I say, they're dangerous.
They certainly are. 7 of their last 10 games have been victories. The Knicks, definitely a team on the rise. Let's go to Newcastle on Friday night. TV game. Leicester Riders with the win, 73-99. Gordon back for the for the Eagles and straight into the starting lineup. And he looked decent in the early stages. The alley-oop lob right at the beginning, and it was sort of score for score until Leicester had an 11-2 run to lead 20-11 after 6:20.
Yeah, it was the games that Leicester have struggled in, conversely to normal, have been games which have primarily been scrappier games. Leicester's offense, and you guys dealt with it on the television a little bit. It's actually Leicester's offense which is purring this year. They're leading the league in points per possession by considerable margin against everybody apart from London. And London's points per possession tends to ratchet up with some of the times they score 120 in a game against teams who aren't guarding them. Yeah. And you get the impression, or I certainly get the impression early, that while Newcastle was scoring and their starting five looked okay offensively, they weren't able to stay with Leicester defensively. And the shots Leicester were getting was what gave that away. The corner threes, basically the screen and roll, the corner threes. Last time they played them, Newcastle did a fairly good job on Crandall insofar as they generally went under the screens on him. And this time they changed it up and they were hedging a bit more and coming out. And that was just giving him the opportunity to either create for himself or create for others, or even throw hockey assists whereby he throws it to one guy and then one more pass it's in the corner. And Newcastle's rotations weren't able to keep up. So from about 4 minutes in, I was kind of fearful for the Eagles with the ease at which Leicester was scoring, because I couldn't think that the Eagles were going to be able to score that easily throughout the game. And the first run in the game was Leicester's. Newcastle came back into it a little bit, and then Fletcher got his poke in the eye, which was probably a significant moment in the game as well.
It was, because he went out with 2 minutes to play in the first quarter, and he didn't return until a few minutes into the second quarter, during which point Riders went 14-5 to start the second quarter. Now, Fletcher came back on the last basket of that, but Leicester were 13 points up at the end of that run.
And the lineup, Newcastle had a lineup out there which was basically dependent almost entirely on Cortez Edwards.
Yeah, it was.
And that didn't actually. Cortez Edwards made some plays in that time, but that wore him down because he was far less effective in the second half. I think they had like Edwards, Matthew, Sayers, Fluger, and maybe Adenekin. And there's just not much offense there. There's not much creativity there. And against a team as athletic as Leicester, the risk is that if your offense isn't functioning, not that you're just playing up and down with them, but that they're going to turn you over and they're going to get out and they're going to get on the break. And once they're on the break, you can't stop them. So it was a turning point in the game. I'm still not overly convinced that Newcastle's defense would have kept them more competitive had Fletcher been able to play a little bit more. But obviously, I think when he went out, he had 7 assists. He only ended up with 10 for the game. Yeah. So, when you get knocked in the eye as well, it's one of those things that it can stay with you during a game a little bit in relation to your perception of what you're seeing and how you play the game. But Leicester were great. I mean, look, Leicester were coming off 2 losses in 2 close, sickening losses, and perfectly for them, they had their biggest weekend of the season coming up. So as a coach, you love that because your guys, if they've got anything about them, are going to be absolutely, to use the footballing phrase, chomping at the bit to get on the court. And who do you want to be getting on the court against when they're at their most ready? The team that's second and the team that's third. That's the time to play them. When your guys are utterly, absolutely locked in without needing to, because of you lose 2 buzzer beaters in a row, you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, and you don't want to feel it again. And the bench, I mean, Washington, again, when he is on and able to actually play well with Crandall, which isn't every game. There are some games where, he kind of takes a backward step and it's all Crandall. But when they're both able to play together and effectively, then they're a formidable team because Connor had a great game. He had 21 points. Still, first couple of shots. The Washington test.
Yeah.
Is he going to shoot it? Yes, he is. And I've thought about it, and the reality is he is unlike any great shooter that we've probably had in the league, in that he is a better shooter off the dribble than he is off the catch. And that's why people don't necessarily go out to him as much. You don't run it. You can't run him off the line because he's generally shooting it off a live dribble.
Yeah.
And still, and nobody wants to be blown past at the top of the key. So I think Leicester got out to it at the end of the second quarter as well.
Yeah.
Newcastle were able to score, but they couldn't stop Leicester scoring. They had a lineup with, I think, Defoe and Adenekin on the court at the same time, and the spacing just collapsed in that, with that. And you could see, the baskets it was getting harder and harder. It's hard to make shots over some of the Leicester players anyway, but from the perimeter. But it's particularly hard when you haven't got the spacing that a stretch four provides you with.
So chomping at the bit is a horse racing thing, but it's the riders. So we can let you off that one. So Leicester were up 11 at halftime, and it kind of stayed around the 10-point mark in the third quarter. And both teams were missing threes. Neither shot the three very well. And then late in the third, Crandall hit one, Washington hit one, and suddenly Leicester were out to 16. Then Falzon gets 8 points, and it's out to 30. And the stat of the game for me was at 30 out to 23 at 62-82. Leicester had 7 players in double figures. Players in double figures for 82 points.
Yeah, I know. And basically, what that tells you is that Newcastle didn't take anything away, apart from probably Corey Johnson. But even then, he got missed open shots. The beginning of the third quarter, I actually thought was the only time Newcastle had a shot, because the game was a little bit scrappy. They had some open looks. Leicester missed some open looks, and they were competing. But I don't know. This is the thing. I don't know if Justin Gordon was on a minutes restriction in that game.
Yeah, he certainly didn't play very much out late. He had 19 minutes in total. 19
minutes in total. And he came out of the game at about the 5-minute mark in the third quarter. And when he came out of the game at the 5-minute mark in the third quarter, the game just went south for Newcastle. And Leicester did what they're meant to do, and basically put their foot on their throat. And as you say, the shots that they made, though, were open shots. And they were open shots from solid spacing, excellent distribution, good passing, and then they ground them down defensively.
So a couple of plus-minus stats for you out of that. Fletcher and Defoe, minus 23. I've got about 5 years worth of plus-minuses, so I looked that up. The only time Defoe's had a worse one than that was against Leicester last year, and 3 of the 5 worst plus-minuses for Fletcher have been against Leicester. But probably the interesting one is the Gordon one that you text me about, where he's a +4.
Well, I mean, the thing with the plus minus with Fletcher and Defoe is they don't get blown out by many teams.
No, exactly, yeah.
Occasionally, London have blown them out, but in the recent past, it's primarily been Leicester when they've been flying. The Gordon stat was incredible, really. That Gordon, in the 19 minutes he played, the Eagles won by 4, and in the 21 minutes he didn't play, they lost by 30. Now it's pretty concerning for the Eagles, because they've had 8 games to play without him, and they still haven't found a way of being able to compete with the best teams without him. And that's kind of been the pattern in those games. I think they're 2-6 or 3-6 in those games without him. So they've got to find a way of either wrapping him up in so much cotton wool and pumping him so full of oxygen that he can play 40 minutes, or alternatively finding a group that can play a 5 that can get on court and hold their own without him. But they struggled.
They did. Leicester's second biggest victory ever in the Northeast. And when I say ever, I mean ever. That goes back to EPAB against Loughborough in 1978. The previous biggest was in Sunderland in October 1991.
What about the Wildcats? Did they not beat the Wildcats by?
Sorry, I'm talking about these two franchises.
Oh, right, not the new.
Yeah. I had to say Northeast because obviously half of it is in Sunderland. If you're going back to 78. So let's move on.
Half it was in Washington.
Well, yes, indeed. Yeah.
I'm being a geek. Sorry.
Let's move on to today's games and
just stop me on that, Dan.
On.
Can I put in a message to the BBL?
Yeah.
It's Mothering Sunday.
Yeah.
There's 5 games.
Yeah.
3 of them tip off at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
We're recording this show at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Why do they hate me? What's going on? The things that one could be doing. Well, anyway, and you were commentating on one of the 5 o'clock games.
Yeah.
Anyway, apart from that, I'm not bitter. Keep going.
Yeah. Okay, let's start with the easy one then.
Yeah.
Surrey Scorchers 83, Plymouth Raiders 112. So the Raiders through to the trophy final, 208-172 on aggregate. Now, to me, I always think 7 points doesn't sound very much, but in the history of two-leg basketball, 7 points is a lot. Yeah. Generally, the team that wins the first leg wins the second leg. Yeah. In the cases where it doesn't happen, it's usually because they only lost by a shot in the first leg. 7 is a lot. The only way you can win, I think, is get rid of those 7 points early on. You can't let them get away. But actually what happened is Chris Porter-Bunt made some early threes. McGill gets to the basket. They're up 9. They're looking comfortable. And the thing you cannot do if you're Surrey is give up 30 points in the first quarter.
No, I mean, you say it seems like not a lot, but it is a lot. How many games have Surrey won by 8 points this season? Not many.
Not many, no.
I know you haven't got that stat. It's a rhetorical question.
No, yeah.
But not many, if any. And maybe one or two. Maybe they might have won one at Manchester by that on the TV. Maybe one at Glasgow. So that's significant. But it comes, these games, and I was involved in a lot of two-legged games. From above and when you're up and when you're down, it all comes down to your level of intensity. And I didn't see any level of intensity increase in Surrey that you need to have. Now they're inexperienced. I don't think any of them have played in two-legged, but I'm trying to think. Teo has probably had a couple of two-legged.
Yeah, Teo will.
But they didn't make that. They haven't made that many semi-finals, and obviously they're starting a relatively young group with Walsh and Richard is young in terms of the BBL. James just got here, and I didn't see that kind of desperation that you need to have when you're clawing back any form of deficit in the second leg. And the desperation starts with the defense. And as you say, Porter-Bunt went off, but he went off because they went under a screen twice and he nailed 2 threes. And then he got to the rim. Now they got size, they got athleticism, but they had no means of stopping them. And it's a second now, and you should be better at defending in the second game than you're on the first, because you saw these guys 48 hours ago.
Yeah.
So what they did, they put up 96 points on you 48 hours ago, and they put up 112 points on you today. Now, that's a culture thing. That's a pride thing. You can't be doing that. Can't be happening. And as you say, it starts with 30 points in the first quarter. What you're looking to do, if you're Surrey, is to hang around, is to put some doubt into Plymouth's mind to see if they get tight. And they failed. And the only way you do that, the way players get tight, is by stopping them scoring, because then they don't feel like they're in control and they're looking around at each other. Plymouth, however, did exactly. I mean, I watched PJ's interview between the games, and he was pretty damning about the way he thought his team had played on Friday night. Wasn't impressed at all. And they came out like he told them that. And it's not just because they made shots, it's because their intent was better. They defended better. The guys who came off the bench knew their roles and performed their roles. And they're doing all this without Hamilton as well.
Yeah.
Which actually, I think, has, again, it's not addition by subtraction with him because he's too good for that. But what it has done is freed up the guards. It's freed them up to play more of a BBL style basketball. So McGill, Porter-Bunt, and Ubiaro, those guys are attacking a heck of a lot more and looking to score early in the shot clock far more than they were. And I think that is possibly part of that is because you've got Will Neighbour standing on the 3-point line, and you've got either Ocharobia or eBay going and rebounding your misses. So why wouldn't you drive? In relation to Surrey, briefly, Cashel was kind of throwing them off a little bit coming back. He was our best player for the first half of the season, but there was a lot of time. But his game is kind of a slowly kind of manipulate the defense, work around the screen, maybe pull up for the 15-footer. And it doesn't fit with the way that they've been playing with Hicks at the point and then with Hildreth at the point where they've just been attack. And when they slowed down a little bit with Cheshire on the basketball, you saw some of these other guys waiting on the other side of the court to see what was happening, and that I thought took them out of the rhythm. And that's a problem. The reason it's a problem is because he's been out for 4 weeks. He's played 2 games, so the other guys aren't used to playing with him, haven't become aware when they need to cut, when they need to move, and that's difficult with having 6 guards that Creon's got. Cashaw's is certainly a talented player. He's worth playing. He has to play, but you have to find a group that he's comfortable playing with. And Creon actually started him in the 3rd quarter, which I thought was the right move, because I think he's better playing with Hicks than he is probably playing with Hildreth.
Porter Bunton 19 at the half. Don't think he scored in the second half, but the game was already over at that point. 50
yeah, look, congratulations to Plymouth, because we talked about them back in December when they lost that game at Newcastle, and Ashley Hunter on the court complaining to the refs afterwards, and they weren't right at that point. And it takes it takes a bit of character, and they've got into a final, and they've got a realistic shot in that final. They're one of the few teams who can compete physically with London.
McGill as well, 32 points off 16 shots is worth
it is. I mean, as I say, I'm less convinced by Surrey's perimeter defense in both games, I'll be honest. So I'd like to see if he manages that with Liggins guarding him next week.
Let's move on to Sheffield 82, Bristol 79. Hemsley back for the Sharks. No Mockford Adozie, Thomas Edwards for the Flyers. Not really much in the first half. A little spell around the first quarter break with Hemsley put Sheffield up, but not a great deal in it. And I have to confess, I left home at half time to drive down to the Morningside Arena, and when I got there, Sheffield were 20 points up basically. So I've looked it up. It was a 14-2 run, but I didn't see how.
Yeah, and I would agree with you about the first half. It was 2 teams who were playing. Helmsley really wasn't kind of that much in the flow of the game. Nichols started off hot, made some shots, but picked up some early fouls as well. And Bristol were basically just hanging around. The 3rd quarter, Bristol imploded offensively. I think the problem that you would say with Bristol this year is that there are points in games where somebody needs to say enough's enough and just step up and say, no, I'm getting us a basket now. They've just gone a 6-0 run, an 8-0 run. I'm going to get us a basket. Give me the ball. This is it. And they haven't got that. And they go on these droughts, and we've talked about it before. But that isn't necessarily a coaching or a system thing. That's just a player saying, look, it's time. Look, Josh Wilshere is going to run. You have a pet player you go to. It might be Okafor throwing the ball up to Delpesh. It might be Wilshere, coming off a screen, whatever, and getting into the paint. And they miss chippies, and and you have different guys. It's almost like they take a turn, one each. And Delpesh misses a dunk, and then Lockett misses a 6-footer. And you're just waiting and all the while, Sheffield's going down the other end and scoring. So that's happened. It's happened to them far too often. And it means that they dig holes for themselves that they can't get out of. And they tried to get out of it.
They nearly did today because Sheffield led by 18 going into the 4th quarter, but only actually made 4 field goals in the final 10 minutes. And it was one of them where Bristol were just reeling it in, and you were wondering, actually, will they run out of time before they got to get all the way back? And they got back to 80-79 with a few seconds left.
Yeah, and I mean, Baker made a couple of threes. Delpesh got some dunks off lobs. Teddy came off a screen and nailed a 3. And suddenly you see the kind of the belief in them. And when I said momentum game to game isn't a thing, in-game momentum is definitely a thing. Because you carry yourself on and you push yourself forward and you suddenly believe again. I still never got the impression Sheffield were going to lose. I don't know, it's just one of those things. Despite the fact, as I say, that Bristol having built this hole, Sheffield kind of put a ladder down there for them to invite them to climb out. And they got to about the 4th rung, but then fell off again. And from memory, and this is what now my mind is playing tricks with us, at the end of this game,
Nichols makes a couple of free throws.
With I think from memory, Sheffield advance the ball with 16 seconds left?
Yes, they did. Yes, yeah.
I meant my game. I'm mixing
Yeah.
games, which I was a little bit surprised at because it meant that it's harder to get the basketball in bounds again, and they reduced their shot clock to 14. And Bristol got a jump ball off the first one.
Yeah,
Bristol
but the
got
arrow
time,
was still
but
with
the arrow was with Sheffield. Damn that arrow! You know, been a fun jump ball.
Yeah.
It'll be a fun jump ball. The second one, Nichols has makes the 2 foul shots, and that's what happened. Sorry, yeah, the coaching again. Andreas missed a beat because he kept Baker in the game when they were defending the inbound with 16 seconds left. Baker had 4 fouls on the second possession after the tie up. They got the ball in, and Baker was the nearest guy. Baker had the foul. That means Baker's out the game. Rogers comes in the game. Now, if you're shooting a 3 to tie the game, you want Baker in the game. So he's come out the game. He should have been out of the game at that time, so Rogers could commit the foul. And then they were down 3, and Josh Wilshere got a decent look.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
Got a decent look. He's made that shot before. It bounced out, and then we had the whole there's 0.3 of a second left. Is there really?
Yeah.
How the hell do you know that? Who's guessing about that? And the game was over. So disappointing weekend for Bristol. Again, you give them an asterisk because they're injured. You give them asterisks because they're coming off the COVID thing. But they got at some point they got to find a way to win. They are 6 and 12, something like that in the league
6
now?
and 11, yeah.
11,
and Surrey are 5 and 11. So
and if we think about it, the narrative of those two teams over the season is very different.
Yeah, it is.
People have talked about Surrey's season's been a disaster. Bristol have been all right. Well, it's they're one loss apart.
Yeah.
So 1 win apart. So at some point in time, it's going to have to be pretty soon. Bristol has to start finding a way to win games.
Yeah. Right. Let's move on to the next game, and as Dave has already outed me, 2 of these next 3 I haven't actually seen. So
we could see, but to be fair, it's another thing to be commentating on Leicester v London game of the season, whilst keeping an eye on Glasgow and Worcester and Cheshire and Manchester at the same time. And typical BVL, of course, I'm actually, there's 3 games that go down to the last minute. All of those happen to go down to the last minute at basically the same time. And I'm beginning to get an understanding of early onset schizophrenia. Just trying to, I listen to your commentary, trying to watch the pictures of I gave up on the Glasgow games. I think I called that one a little bit early. Glasgow tried to throw it away, and then watched a bit of the Cheshire game as well. But let's crack on and see what we.
So let's crack on. Glasgow 88, Worcester 81. Gino Crandall had a great game for Glasgow. Add to your schizophrenia. Rocks led Rocks lead from tip to buzzer, and they got out to an early lead, and Keeling and Murray hitting 3s, and they were 23-12. I mean, it was one of those where you look at the score going, wow, here's the Rocks team that normally is offensively challenged with scoring freely in the early stages. But
Jordan Williams wasn't playing. That's the first thing. That's a big thing for Worcester because of what the pieces that they have. He's probably their Justin Gordon, if I was putting it into context. It's that type of loss, and that meant that Worcester were undersized probably at every position against Glasgow, probably other than the point guard. The other thing is Gareth played his first 5 basically the whole first quarter because they were rolling, didn't sub anybody, and so that's his best group. And that's Bunyan, Keeling, Murray, Van Sowers, and Delph. And Parks is a big guy, but he's big and wide. Delph is big and long, bigger and longer. So Delph was able to get his shot, and he was feeling it. So he had 12 points early on. Gareth made a 3. Worcester really don't have much defensive presence because they're having to play kind of McSwiggan, who's kind of not really back in shape. In shape, healthy. He doesn't look quite right at the moment to me. At the 4, and Burns a little bit, and they just didn't they looked a bit gassed, to be honest. Worcester, they didn't really. Every time I turned my head to the game, Worcester scored. I couldn't work out how it was. I kept they were down by 7 or down by 9 because I'm watching 3 games, and Bowneck made some shots, and I'm thinking, well, Worcester, how's this happening? But Glasgow's offense was efficient, and they benefited, I think, from being allowed to run their offense. Worcester weren't able to pressure them away from the basket. They weren't able to force them like 30 or 35 feet out to start their offenses. That means Keeling got into a rhythm, and then and Delph was a really big part for them.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it at halftime, Delph was on 3 fouls, so the only reason he seemingly came out of the game was the foul trouble, and then he comes back in the second half, scores 8 in a row, which just keeps the scoreboard ticking over, and obviously they've got the lead, and it keeps them at bay, and they actually got to 14 points up with 2 to play.
And nearly blew it
in the third quarter, yeah, and then Bowneck hits a couple of threes, and with a minute to go, it's a 4-point game, and you sort of wonder, is this, have the Rocks got the mental fortitude to see this over the line? But they did.
Well, I'll tell you a bit about that. Firstly, interesting, good decision by Gareth. He kept Delph on. He put Delph on the court to start the second half with 3 fouls. Put your talent, get your talent on the court. And if he's going to foul out, he's going to foul out, but you're not going to sit him out. So he put him back on the court, and that allowed them to avoid the droughts that they needed to avoid in the game. But the last minute, boy, did Glasgow look like a team that hadn't won a game, because they turned the ball. They gave up. They turned the ball over at least twice. I think on one occasion, Bowneck stole the ball, and when they were down 4 with about 30 seconds left, and Keeling had to run back and block him at the rim. There was another one where Worcester blew. Bowneck had made a 3, probably a minute to go in the game. They got another steal, and he had a 2-on-1 break, and he pulled up for the 3 in transition, which would have made it a 1-point game, but they would have made it a 2-point game.
Yeah.
One was a lot wiser move, and he missed it. And in Glasgow, they crow. I mean, I'll have to watch it back again. I only watched it once, and it never got to the point whereby one play made a difference, as it were. One play changed it, but they crawled over the line. They played really good. From what I could see, they played really good 38 minutes. But in the last 2 minutes, they looked like a team that hadn't won in a long time.
Well, they have now, so a third one on the board for them. Let's go to Cheshire, Manchester next, and we'll save Leicester, London for last. No Satchel for 77-75 to the Knicks, I should say. No Satchel for the Giants. Good start for the Knicks. They get 11-4 up, but then over the next sort of 8 minutes or something, the Giants were just, again, it was one of those where it was 2 or 3 scores to 1, and then they pulled out to a 10-point lead.
Yeah, and I think they were helped by the fact that Satchel wasn't there, because they were good in this game, Manchester. And everything that was said about what they were on Friday night and Sunday before, when they gave 100 points against Newcastle, 100 points against London. This game caught my attention more than I thought it would, with the Leicester-London game going on, because it was an intriguing game. And the reason I think they were better is because those minutes were spread between Johnson, Jaramapur, and Ulf. And they're all solid players, and they're all solid, committed, competitive defenders. Johnson is a really solid type of guy you put in the trenches with you. You might end up blowing your own foot. You might end up blowing his own foot off as well as everybody else's. But he's a guy you'd want. There's a lot to like about him, and he gets to play basically a lot of the game as a result. And then you have those shots freed up for Whelan, who likes to shoot, and Cassell. And they played a really sound game. Hudson came in and gave them some excellent minutes as well. And they also probably, I think, caught Cheshire a little bit on the bounce back from Bristol. They played with 6 players and a couple of guys who don't play much. And Cheshire was certainly, I think they were struggling with the physicality and the commitment of the Giants in this game all the way through it, to be honest. But they've got these guys who make plays.
It was one of them where I was obviously had the stat cast on for that, and I was thinking just spin it forward to the fourth quarter and see which of the Knicks players was gonna come hot, whether it was Ross or McCall in the backcourt. So let's actually, because Giants spent most of the third quarter in front, let's spin it on to the fourth quarter. Powell makes the first score, and then Knicks score 9 in a row as build sort of thing to lead by 5. And you wonder about Manchester at that point, given the way they've been going, what's their response to something like that? But they've fought their way back into it.
Yeah, and you know, the best way of describing it is that they've got some competitive guys. I'm just not necessarily sure they know the best way to compete, if that makes sense. And I think they're learning on the Hudson's really good. Manchester's transition defense was so much better. There wasn't their offensive execution in the game. From what I could see while I was watching 3 games, was more patient, and there was less wasted possessions, you would say, on a wing and a prayer. Less bouncing of the basketball, and a lot of that is around having a centre in Jaramapur who they can all play around and throw the basketball into. But having that presence does mean that you've got a foothold in the game, and they were able to come back and make plays. But it got to the end game, and who's going to make the plays at the end?
So Hudson hits a 3 to tie it at 70, but then McCall and 1. They're up 5 with just under a minute to go. Johnson 3 free throws. Garamipur ties the game at 75, and then you'll have to tell me about how Ross wins the game.
Just makes a Ross shot.
Yeah.
I didn't catch the very beginning of the play, but I saw it as it happened. I haven't watched it back, I'm afraid. He's down. He catches the basketball down on the right wing, probably foul line extended. He takes one dribble down towards the baseline. He squares up. He rises up. He's got a hand in his face, and he makes a 22-footer. About 20-footer, whatever, but a foot inside the 3-point line. Initially, they put 3 on the scoreboard, but it was a 2 for watching it. And I think there was 1 second left, something like that, at that point in time. And Manchester never got anything off in response. He just made a shot, and he's made multiple shots. And if he hasn't made them, then McCall has made them.
Yeah,
they're just basically riding the clouds at the moment in relation to that. And it's a bit of I actually felt for Manchester a little bit in the game because they lost the game 77-75. If they'd lost 101 to 99, it'd be nothing. But they got stuck into that game, and it was it's a local derby. Obviously, there's a little bit of niggle, I think, and maybe not amongst the players, but certainly the benches seem to be, not the coaches, but the hangers on the benches. Seem to be going in. The towel wavers seem to be going at full speed, on the spin cycle, and it was quite. I think it was encouraging for Manchester, but again, they're running out of games as well.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Knicks 3 games over 500 now, looking good, and as you say, all they need to do is be in the game in the fourth quarter. They got.
Yeah, I am a little bit worried that you get this regression to the mean with them. They've got 6. They're playing 6.5 players basically, and it's going to be tough for them to maintain. Last time they had a bit of a run like that, they came to Newcastle and they laid an egg at Newcastle and they were awful.
Yeah,
I'm a bit worried whether they're going to be able to maintain it with what they've got, but to all credit to them for getting to where they've got to.
Yeah, just 4 points off the bench tonight, those from NBA. So let's move on to the game I was at, so I can have a reasonable stab at what happened. Leicester Riders 78, London Lions 73. And of course, I walked into the building, and the first thing I see is Mo Walker in full uniform running the layup line. And I'm thinking, is he going to play, or is that mind games, or what? Because we've seen him in recent weeks work out before the game, but not with uniform on, ready and on the roster. I think they put him on the stats in Cheshire, but he wasn't actually ready to play.
I would have laid you 1,000 to 1 that he would play that game. I think it would have taken probably half of the Leicester team to have been taken out by a sniper for Rob to put him on the court. Cool. not having played for 5 months in that game against that team. It's a nice thought. Yeah, I noticed you speculated in the second quarter, and you're right to do so. But there's, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that to your worst enemy. Put them into a game like that with just cold. It would just be. It's difficult enough to integrate a guy who's been there for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Than that. But anyway, yeah.
This was a real game of runs in the first half. So William Lee 9 points early on. Riders get out 13-6. The Lions reply with 14 of the next 16 to lead 21-15. Leicester then hit 10 in a row around the quarter break to be 25-21. It was really back and forth. Neither team able to hold on to momentum for long. That's right. It was a defensive game, as these games. It's interesting. The games at the Morningside have been defensive games. The games at the Copper Box have been offensive. Yeah. There's a dynamic about that. I'm not quite sure what it is. Yeah. But there's something about that, Yeah. Leicester started off better because London were seeking to shoot themselves into the game. And unfortunately, it's not a game like that with the intensity and the length and the commitment on defense that is out there. It's not a good game. It's not a good way to try and shoot yourself into a game. And primarily Dirk Williams and, to a lesser extent, Kevin Ware later, they both struggled. And you wouldn't say they weren't ready for the game, but they didn't. They couldn't offer their team anything. And it was Justin Robinson, who knew, and Liggins who were really able to deal with them. But Leicester were able to get to the rim easier all night, and they were able to get to the rim easier all night because of Gino Crandall primarily, and the finishing of Darian Nelson-Henry. And this guy, and I'm going to say a few words because I think it needs to be said. Darian Nelson-Henry is currently, in my view, the best centre in the league. He doesn't have to play massive minutes, so that probably helps him a little bit. But nevertheless, he is efficient. He is smart. He does exactly what his team needs him to do. He doesn't take anything off the table, if I put it that way. There's no postulating or complaining or whinging. He's obviously an Ivy League guy, so he knows what's going on. And in this game, and we'll get to the overall game in a minute, but in this game, if you compare his numbers to the 3 London centres, he outplayed them on his own. And in a game where shots and scores are at a premium, 2 things become critically important. One is transition points, which is about a wash. Depending on which team was on a run, team scored in transition. And 2 is points in the paint. And Leicester won that. And these were not easy points in the paint. These were points in the paint caused primarily by Crandall's athleticism and Nelson-Henry and occasionally Fraser's finishing. And that ultimately was a determining factor in the game. Now, going back a little bit, the game went back and forwards. And the interesting thing in the first quarter was that Rob ran his normal substitution patterns. And he took Gino out at the 4-minute mark. Now, by the 2.5-minute mark, Gino was back in. Now normally he's sitting until the end of the quarter. But they lost those minutes by 8. He said it in commentary. And Rob took one look at it and said, I can't do that. And this is the thing with big games that people don't often understand. There's a change in the coaching dynamic, in that it isn't as much about planning the whole game out, because it's a dogfight. You're planning the next 3 possessions. You're trying to win the next 3 possessions. You can't afford a team to go on a 12-0 run whilst you're getting rest for one of your guys. You can't do that. So what you have to do is micromanage it, and you have to be absolutely alert to any concerns you have in relation to any of your players who might be a hole. And you cannot let them stay out there or the guy longer than they need to, and you cannot let the guys you need to be on the court stay on the bench longer than you need to. And that was. And he had the additional challenge of that is Crandall gets the technical because he thinks he should have had a foul, and he complains about it. And he gets a T, so that's 2, and you've got that in the back of your head. And obviously Nelson-Henry had foul trouble at stages in the game as well. So that's another sort of thing you've got to throw into the managing. And that's a thing you're right. Absolutely, that's what you've got to bear up. You've got to pay in mind. How do I balance it? And I think he ended up taking them out with about 2 minutes to go in the first half.
he rode Crandall quite a while.
Yeah.
In the first half with 2 fouls, and he had to, because
Yeah.
this is a game for the marbles. This is
Yeah.
6 or 7 games that's going to determine how your season goes, and you have to have the guys that you need on the court as much as you can. Now, and this goes for London as well, because London, we've heard all season about how London have got 16 players.
Yeah.
Well, they played 8.
We didn't see that.
At the end of the day, they played. Jules Diacodo played a minute.
Yeah.
Joe Wickerman played 2 minutes, so they don't count.
Yeah.
They played 7 or 8 players. They played 8 players, and 3 of them were centres.
Yeah.
Who didn't play together. Tuaya, Ali Hodzic, and
Shane Walker.
So this is a kind of a brutal mano a mano battle to the end.
Yeah.
And
Liggins plays 40 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely, quite right too. Now, there's certain other things which I'll come to in a minute about the way that they rotate the other guys. I'm interested, but even so,
44 apiece at halftime, and first play, or was it second play of the second half? Nelson Henry gets his 3rd foul, and that is that you talked about decisions. What do? Do you take him out at that point? Fraser has played pretty well in the first half in the minutes that he's got. Do you ride him out there? Rob rides him out there, so it's a risk. He could easily pick. There was one where Justin went through as well, and he did well to, just be in the way but not commit a foul, but got scores at the other end, made some plays. So it was a bit of a gamble, but it was one worth taking and that paid off.
It was. I mean, yes, it was a bit of a gamble, but it was also close to a no-brainer. I'm talking in this context about every possession mattering.
Yeah.
You're not going to take your guy out. Your main guy, the guy who's dominating the game for you, the guy who's getting easy points inside for you, potentially hampering. Anth made the point on commentary, potentially hampering his rhythm. He comes out, he gets back in, he picks one up again. You're not going to do that. It's kind of the coaching by numbers way of doing it. 2 fouls in the first half, 3 fouls early in the third quarter. We'll better take him out again, protect him. But every possession is worth the same as every other possession.
Yeah.
And it was a lesson I learned very, very quickly from Flanoy, probably on the bus back from Milton Keynes about 10 years ago, when I took Charles Smith out of the game with 3 fouls halfway through the third quarter to protect him. He don't need protected. What? He can play. Why are you taking him? So Charles is giving me daggers, and out the game, blah, blah. It's because you want your guy, and I learned very quickly that you have to trust your players to make plays, and if they're the guys you need on the court, they have to play. So Rob did absolutely the right thing, and he did, and he rode it to about the 5-minute mark with Gino. Now there's a difference with Gino as there is with Nelson Henry, because Gino is more temperamental, so you have to know your player. And there is a real risk, because we saw it 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That doesn't just pick up his 4th, but he picks up his 5th at the same time.
Yeah.
And indeed, he was probably about 3 feet away from being out the game.
Yeah. About 3 minutes into the second quarter, he just got in front.
Yeah, because if he hadn't been in front of whoever bought him, I think it was in the fast break, he's out the game.
I think it was Robinson, but yeah.
If he's not, if he's to the side of him instead of in front of him, then that's unsportsmanlike, and he's gone.
Yeah.
So you have to balance him a bit more carefully. But where this game turned, I think, so Rob gave it till about the 5-minute mark and took him out. And where this game turned was that point, because that was the point. It was about the score was close, and that was the point where London, in my view, had to put the hammer down. The game was being played at that point. When I say the game was being played, the game could have been decided at that point. You got to a kind of a sliding doors crux moment in the game, right? If London go on a run, maybe Gino has to come back in a little bit frustrated. He's been pulled in and out. Rob has to pull him in a bit earlier. Maybe he picks up that foul, whatever. Instead, they play 5 minutes, basically even. And Connor gets a couple of foul shots on the buzzer to bring it back very close. And London, and this is where I think Vince missed a trick, and it's the same pattern as what happened against Sheffield 2 weeks ago. Justin sat down. Justin was playing. Justin had 21 points in 29 minutes in this game. Justin was ready for this game. This was an MVP game, for Justin, for Liggins, for Crandall, for Nelson Henry, all your top guys. And Justin sat down, and Kevin Ware came in, and Kevin Ware wasn't ready in relation to making plays in that game. And if you look at that sequence of 5 minutes, when Leicester were vulnerable, they weren't playing well. They were throwing the ball away a little bit. Fraser threw it away. Johnson hadn't made a shot the whole game. They were looking to find ways to score. Nelson Henry wasn't on the court either. That was where that game could have been broken open. 8 or 10 point game. The whole mental disintegration of the other team comes into it. At that point, you beat your 2 guys on 3 fouls. Maybe they get frustrated, coming in the foul. And I wouldn't have took Justin out. I just would not have took Justin out. If Liggins can play 40, then in that game, if I'm going to get Justin a break, it may be a couple of minutes in the fourth quarter, but not in the third quarter, not when Crandall was on the bench. And I think Ware was very aggressive, but Leicester just packed their defense. And a couple of times he dribbled the ball over the baseline, hit the side of the backboard. He's out of control. Yeah. And he was trying. He's not saying, it happens to people. They have games whereby things don't go the way he's not making shots. And just like when Rob took Gino out in the first quarter and put him back in straight away, playing the next possession, Kevin Ware would have had maybe two or three of those possessions. And then it would be Justin back in the game, and I'm going with my guys. And we'll see, mano a mano, and we'll see who comes out at the end. So they got to the beginning of the fourth quarter about even, and then obviously Gino is back in the court, and he is fresh. And Darian Nelson-Henry's back in the court, and he is fresh, which gives them a kick up. And I know this sounds like I'm kind of overemphasizing Gino. How much can one player make a difference? But Gino is plus 22 in this game. It's a 5-point game. The minutes that Gino didn't play, they still lost. They lost them by 17. Right, and it should have been more because they're very vulnerable. They're vulnerable without him. And Leicester and London didn't take advantage. And then Leicester just bared down and played defense. And London, I'm afraid, couldn't score. Couldn't get the ball at the rim. The centers couldn't score. Tuwaya didn't have a point. Farrow had 6 points. Shane Walker 6 minutes, 4 fouls, no points. And Nelson Henry and Crandall were able to get to the rim just enough to keep the game to separate Leicester.
It was really intense, and you could really feel it sat courtside. I don't know how it comes through on the screen, but the pressure on the ball, both ways, just the difficulty, probably more so for the Leicester guards, because London were able to press for a lot longer, just getting the ball over the halfway line, and the way they denied Gino the ball as much as they could to try and keep it out of his hands. You could really feel it. Let's spin it on to the end of the game. So Leicester were a score or 2 up for most of the fourth quarter. Robinson hits a 3, very Justin Robinson shot, nails it. 2.5 minutes to go. It's a 1-point game, and then Leicester, as you say, go back to the 2 guys that have been doing it all game. Crandall first, then Nelson Henry with a great drive where he sort of kept the guy behind him, and Leicester are up 5 with a minute 42 to go.
2 shots at the rim. The separating factor was the athleticism of Crandall and the size and skill level of Nelson Henry. They were the 2 separating points of the game, because Justin could compete with Crandall in relation to his shooting, but they can trap that shot, and nobody could compete with Nelson Henry in relation to finishing at the rim. Tuwaya had blown a couple of dunks.
Yeah, he did.
Walker has never been a great finisher at the rim. He's always been a step out guy, and Vince ended up having to play, Ward Hibbert as well as kind of a de facto 4, which isn't really a 3-4 with Parker, which separated again takes a little bit of spacing away as well. But London stayed with it. That 5-point game, I think they got an offensive rebound. Ward Hibbert.
Ward Hibbert got an offensive rebound, and then on the shot clock buzzer makes 16 footer.
That was still a difficult shot. And going back, actually, just go back a little bit, because there was another thing that struck me. 1 minute 42 in the game. London called a timeout. And I don't know if that was down 5. That might have been down 5.
Down 5, 73-68.
They called a timeout. And for the life of me, I don't know why they advanced the ball. None of their team knew that. None of their team seemed to know that. The shot clock had just gone from 24 to 14. Leicester would not be pressing on the inbound. Leicester, that point, you're up 5. Leicester aren't going to be gambling on the inbounds on the base. So they didn't really get Leicester were able to deny the inbounds.
Yeah.
And I think threw the ball away at half court at the end with
it got poked away, and it was a 14-second violation.
And I would love to know the strategy of why you would take away the 10 seconds of the shot clock in that situation. I didn't get it then. I don't get it now. Someone can explain it to me, but I don't get it. Anyway, so that was a big possession, because that was a chance. That once you're getting into 5-6 points with a minute to go in the ball, you're in a situation where you kind of shouldn't lose. Probably 5 points with a minute to go in the ball, you shouldn't lose. And Leicester weren't far away from that.
Yeah. But bear in mind, they'd already played London and done exactly that earlier in the season.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, they shouldn't. Well, does lightning ever strike twice?
Well, not often, that's for sure.
Happily.
So actually, it comes down to some defensive plays. You talked about the shot clock violation. London then got a stop on the back of the score, Ward Hibbert. And then it looked for all the world like Nelson Henry is at the basket, and from nowhere, Shane Walker comes from behind and comes up with what felt like a game-saving block at the time.
Well, it was a give yourself an opportunity block, which we did. But what was interesting was on the inbounds from the baseline, they ended up switching out, and Ward Hibbert ended up on Nelson Henry. And that's not, you think that's not necessarily a bad thing. He's 18 feet from the basket, but he hasn't been on him all day. He doesn't know his tendencies. And Nelson Henry had only one thing he could do with 3 seconds on the shot clock, which was drive hard to his right. That's primarily his favorite move anyway. But his footwork is generally based around drop steps around the paint and movement within 6 feet of the basket. 18 feet from the basket is not a situation he's normally in. No. So it allowed him to drive right with 3 seconds to go and get a shot up at the rim. And what London really needed at that point was to cut off that drive, make him fade away, and you've probably got a shot clock violation. He didn't do that. He'd switched on to a guy he didn't know. And of course, because of those switches, London's discombobulated in relation to the rebounding, which means that when Nelson Henry gets it up on the board, he's at the rim himself. You've got, I think, was it Lee at the rim?
He and Lee combined for the offensive rebound.
And I think Liggins was left on the weak side with Lee, and Liggins was with two guys because he was focusing on Nelson Henry as he's coming in. Lee comes over the back of him and makes a play, and that's the game. So, is there any need to switch out on Nelson Henry? Probably not. You probably want to keep your big guy on it to take the space away. As an aside on that, I hated the technical. I'm back on my rant about it. We had, it's a 5.6 point game with 10 seconds to go. Shane Walker walked over in frustration. He kicked the advertising board, but kicking would actually probably be a bit harsh. He moved it with his foot. It didn't fly away. It didn't collapse. He moved it with his foot. And there's a referee on the baseline who thinks it's necessary to call that a technical. That happened multiple times this season, and it's not been called. The referee, whoever organises the referee, if Martin Ford's watching this, send a rule out, put it out there. If you kick anything on the side of the court, it is an automatic technical, and then everybody knows. But for me, no. The difference between a violent, aggressive, angry manoeuvre and what Shane Walker did, and it didn't really matter. It doesn't affect the game. It's over, but you can't have certain refs calling it and certain refs calling technicals here, there, and everywhere, and other refs not. It just makes it impossible for the players, impossible for the coaches. So that's a little rant about the reffing over, and that was the game. Gino Crandall plus 22 in 28 minutes, something like that. Justin Robinson 21 points in 29 minutes. Gino couldn't play because he was in foul trouble. Justin wasn't in foul trouble. Justin has to play more than 29 minutes in that game.
Yeah, the other stats of note, almost a triple-double for Gino, 12 points, 8 rebounds, 12 assists. And if you count fouls drawn, he wasn't far off a quadruple double, because 8 fouls drawn as well.
What he needs to do, this is the one, there is one Achilles in his game, and that is, he can't be getting these technicals. The only reason he didn't get a triple-double was because he took himself out of about 8 minutes of that game with his technical.
Yeah.
And it is tough because sometimes the reason the best players, now I've been through this, having coached Ramon for so many years at Newcastle, the reason they get the most foul calls is because they draw the most fouls, because they are capable, because they have more skill. And often it can be held against them insofar as they don't get every call, because nobody wants to see them getting every call every time. Whereas in the NBA, we hear about quote mark star calls and a guy getting the line 20 times because of who he is. It's generally not because of who he is. It's generally because he's that good compared to the competition. And sometimes in the BBL, that doesn't quite happen. And that causes people who know that what they've done is actually too quick for the refs. So the refs haven't seen it to say something. And then you get the tall poppy thing, and the tall poppy gets chopped down, and then you get the technical for the player, and the player gets frustrated, and you've got to handle it on the bench. And Gino Crandall, I'll call him by his first name, I've never spoken to him in my life. Gino Crandall has to figure that out, because that's the only thing which is going to be any form of kind of orange flag in relation to him going forward. He's savvy. He's so savvy in relation to every other area of the game. But he can't be picking up technicals when he's so important to his team. And he certainly can't be picking them up when there is second foul or his third foul or something like that. Because as you say, a technical, a cheap unsportsmanlike where you don't even mean to commit it.
Yeah.
On the bench.
Yeah.
It's a horrible rule. I hate it, but it happens.
Yeah.
It happened to us with Guildford a couple of years ago with Thatcher. A cheap technical, and then a kind of a fast break unsportsmanlike, which might have been and might not have been. It was one of those, Quincy Taylor, how fast was he? Were you in front of him, were you behind him, that type of thing. And the referees decide that he wasn't, and you're out the game. And the players don't understand it because it's not an American rule.
No.
We don't get it. Anyway, sorry, rant over.
No, a cracking game of basketball. An advantage Leicester in the title race. Two fewer Leicesters than London.
I think there's probably more like 40 love than advantage. I think they're really in the box seat now. Not so much, interestingly, because of the losses, but because of the wins.
Yeah.
The amount of games that London have coming up. London, they have lots of players, but they do tail off in talent once they get past players kind of 10 and 11. They're not going to be able to play players 8 to 16 and win games in the BBL. So the guys that we need to play are going to have to play in those games. And the amount of games that they're going to have, it's difficult to see them running the table and winning every game, which is what they would need to do. Hope Leicester lose one and go from there. I think Leicester might drop another game or two. Obviously, everybody's only one broken finger away from significant difficulties, and depending on whose hand the finger is. But at the moment, let's be frank, Leicester are the best team. Leicester are the best team. They're playing the best basketball. They played the most consistent basketball throughout the year. They've struggled to win the big close games. That's the only reason that they've not been in the two finals. But conversely, when they lost that game to London in the trophy, my immediate thought was that they would win the league, because that loss, you can only beat so many teams so many times, and sometimes it can be relevant to which competition you win in, as to which other competition you don't win if the teams are that closely matched. And so by losing to Newcastle in the cup and losing to London in the trophy, it was always likely that they would get back at Newcastle in the league, at least one or possibly two wins, and certainly get back at London in the league as well. You couldn't see London sweeping them. And because of that, because just the nature of the give and take between teams who are good, who go back and forward against each other, you don't see many sweeps in the NBA playoffs for the same reason. Teams counter each other, and talent kind of plays each other close, and one team wins one game, the next team wins the next game. So they're in the box seat. The moment they deserve to be, if they stay healthy, they should win the league.
Well, we will keep an eye on it over future weeks, but we're going to wrap it up for now. So thank you very much for listening. We will be back next Sunday. Have a great week. We'll see you then. Goodbye.